First of all, I'd like to thank you and PJ, Peter Joseph, and all of you that have worked so hard to make this meeting possible. And of course, during the question period, don't be polite. If there's anything I say that you don't understand, question it. And if you ask me a question, if I fail to answer it, say you didn't answer my question. So don't be polite. In order to learn new things, you have to learn how to think differently. I want to tell you that, first of all, there are major problems in the world today, other than my hearing aids. I want to say that the language that we use today was designed hundreds of years ago. The language all over the world is very old. That makes it almost impossible to talk to one another. What we do is we talk at each other. Now let me tell you what that means. Sometimes we say, well, have a nice weekend. Why don't we say, have a nice life? Why just a weekend? In other words, the language is automatic. How are you? How's the family? They don't really give a damn about your family. Tell them you need $3,000 for an operation. Gosh, that you can't have it for me. Then why do you ask me how I am? So the world you live in is full of shit as a Christmas turkey. So what I want to try to get across to you is we need a language that's not subject to interpretation. When you read the Bible, that is the Christian Bible, or any Bible, when you read it, it's subject to interpretation. People say, I think Jesus meant this. Oh, no, he meant that. You're both wrong. He meant this. So the Bible itself generates the Seventh-day Adventist, the Christian, the Catholic. You have all kinds of different denominations because people don't have a common agreement. Now, the question that comes up, is it possible to develop a language that's not subject to interpretation? Mathematics, chemistry, engineering. When engineers talk to each other, they don't say, believe me, this is very strong. They give you its tensile strength, its compression strength, its torsional strength in numbers. And when chemists write a formula, if you send it to Japan or any country in the world, they interpret it the same way. So I'm just trying to tell you it is possible to develop a language that's not subject to interpretation. Not only that, when you talk to other people today, they walk away and they tell somebody else what they think you mean, because the language is not that precise. And a lot of people get into wars and arguments, although they would agree on the same thing, but the language doesn't register that way. Well, when you come to think of it, think of the world you live in. The world you live in today is a monetary world based on money. Money produces incentive. It also produces corruption, embezzlement, paying off senators. I want to try to tell you this, that all nations are basically corrupt. All of them. Politicians say things people like to hear. I'm not up here to win your approval. I'm up here to tell you what I think will work, do away with war, poverty, hunger, unemployment. All the problems we have today are technical. They're not political. If you don't understand me, ask any politician you know or believe in, how would you stop cars from hitting each other? Well, I don't know. How can you grow more food for people all over the world? They don't know. How can you clean the dust out of the atmosphere? They don't know. Really, they don't know anything. They are just people, businessmen and lawyers. Now, there's nothing the matter with a lawyer as long as he keeps his hands in his own pockets. So the world you live in is a world where we're predatory over one another. If you need a root canal job, somebody makes thousands of dollars. If somebody dents your car, somebody makes a lot of money. So if you need eyeglasses, another guy makes money. So everybody makes money on human misery. How many of you knew that there's a metal with a memory? Will you raise your hands? How many of you knew that there's a new surgical material? It's used for sutures, for sewing up or stitching the body, that has a memory. And the doctor takes that material and he ties a surgical knot Then he straightens it out and he sticks it through your skin. First he cuts it. And the heat of the body causes it to tie a surgical knot. Isn't that fantastic? That exists. Those of you that would like to see that metal, well, maybe I'll make it available tomorrow for some of you that want to get together. I'll show you how it works and how it behaves itself. That means if you made a chair, contour chair, for the human body, contoured, not designed by an artist, designed by an anatomist, and then you flatten that chair out, and you ship 10,000 chairs to China flat, connect two electrodes, they move back into the shape. That means you can design buildings with memory materials all through it, and then when you make a dome-shaped building or any shaped building, you flatten it out, ship thousands of houses to India, and when you connect two electrodes, it takes a minute and a half, becomes a full-size building. This business of men training to use plaster, hammer and nails like Jimmy Carter is a jackass. He's way behind the times. So I'm trying to tell you today, we have the technology to wipe out poverty, give medical care to everybody on earth. If the nations join together, as long as they remain separate, as long as few nations control most of the world's resources, you're going to have territorial disputes, arguments, poverty, unemployment, the same story over and over again. People are not educated in universities today. Universities today have the best equipment, scientific equipment, mathematics. They have equipment to measure the strains of all kinds of materials. What's happening? The wars are getting worse. The old atom bomb, today, they're 1,000 times stronger than the atom bomb. Now, what can you accomplish with that? So I'm trying to tell you that the military is comprised of extremely stupid people also, because they don't know how to solve problems. They use bombers. Remember this, it isn't machines that kill people. It's men that fly over cities that press a button and drop an atom bomb. Even a guided missile is guided by people. And man puts himself on a pedestal. They say he's the greatest creation of nature. He's the guy that pollutes the oceans, the air, that kills other people in the name of God if their God is different than my God. Boom, we get rid of the guy. So here you have human beings that say they're the greatest achievement in nature. Only the next few years will determine that. U.S. has 300 submarines. Each one has more destructive power than all the wars in history. Now, what can you accomplish with that? Now, the American senators and congressmen voted on a support system under a mountain where they can all go and live for 6 months. It provides food, oxygen, everything. What do you come out to? A burnt-out radioactive world? That's what I mean by the government agents and government people are not technical. The problems today are technical, not political. 1,000 years ago or 100 years ago, politics was just borderline. Today it's no longer necessary. Again, don't take my word for it. Ask politicians how to solve problems. How do you bridge the difference between nations? Well, we don't know how to do that. That's why we keep armies, to keep them from invading us. Well, you invaded everybody else. Where did you think you got America from? You took it from the Indians. And then you took Spain. From Spain, you took California and New Mexico from Mexico by killing people. The same with the British, the same with the Polish, the same with all nations. They kill and take land away from others. We don't go to other countries to bring them democracy. That's the crap they give you. We go there because they have oil or something we need. If you want a world without war, without poverty, without hunger or unemployment or abuse of any other human being, this is what the Venus Project has to offer. So in simplifying this, we can open this portion to questions, which I'm sure a lot of you have. I will try to answer the questions for you. What we want to do is build a global resource-based economy where resources are available to everyone. What I want to make sure you understand is what a resource-based economy is. It means that the world has enough resources to feed, clothe, house everybody, build hospitals for everybody. More than enough. I'm not talking about a handout society that lives in poverty, although it's all joined together. I'm talking about a very high standard of living. If you don't understand that, the middle-class American lives better than kings. He has television in his car. He has cell phones. No king ever had that. He had horse and wagon. He'd go over a bumpy road, and he couldn't heat the castle. It was so big, most of the heat rose, and they froze, and they were very uncomfortable. So if the middle class today lives better than kings, with the future and the new technologies, particularly nanotechnology, where in the next 15 years, not according to me, according to nanotechnologists, they say they'll be able to arrange atoms in whatever molecular structure they want. That means they'll be able to make gold, all kinds of minerals, materials, meat, tissue, plants, without growing food. The future is a fantastic place if we turn science loose. That means today you try to dig up nickels and dimes for heart disease, cystic fibrosis, the starving Africans. That's a long way to go. We can easily provide for the needs of all people. If you don't understand that, consider World War II. We bombed England, Germany bombed England flat. France was bombed to rubble. And they gave soldiers whatever they needed, machine guns, airplanes, submarines. They cost billions of dollars. Why don't they do that during peace? Because they like things to wear out and break down. The army itself is corrupt in the sense that when they conscript the lives of young men, that is putting up your life to defend your country, they should conscript all the war industries so no one makes a buck out of war. Do you understand that? The same basis of pay as the armed services. After the war, give them back to factories. If you took the profit out of war, there'd be no war. War is the biggest scandal, this business of human corruption in the world. It's always been that. And the Holy Bible says there'll always be war and rumors of war. And we shall always have the poor amongst us. I can't accept that garbage. I think that we have the technology to solve all kinds of problems. When we put to science, we want an atom bomb, they develop an atom bomb. The trouble with scientists is they're controlled by different nations. And the scientists of Germany fell in line with Hitler. The scientists of Italy fell in line with the Italian government. And the scientists of America fell in line. So today you really don't have any scientists. You have specialists in chemistry, physics, botany. In the future, we will never generate a person of a single profession proficiency. What we will do is create in schools generalists, so people understand anthropology, sociology, the history of civilization, so they'll understand these things. They cannot be used to make weapons of destruction. The kids will be educated, brought up with all kinds of people. It's the parents that get to the kids and say, you're a Catholic, you don't play with that little Lutheran boy. Or you're an Indian, and you have no respect for that country. Or you're Irish, and the Irish are the greatest people in the world. That separates people. If parents raise children to their limited knowledge, you're hurting the children of the future. So in the future, somebody asked me, who will make the decisions as to who raises children? First kind of books you want to read is What Made Leonardo da Vinci? What is creativity? Well, you ask any creative person, say, what is creativity? They usually don't know. And even if they're inventors, and they've invented a lot of things, say, how do you invent? I don't know, it just comes to me. So they think it's natural. They think there's such a thing as human nature. That's what most people believe all over the world. That some people are lazy, some are hardworking, some are honest, some are dishonest. All that is bullshit, lies. It depends on where you're coming from. If you were raised in ancient Rome, when they used to feed Christians to lions, that was normal to that culture. So the whole family would come to see Christians being fed to lions. And the kids would say, Daddy, can I come next week to see Christians fed to lions? And Daddy would say, if you behave yourself. So you see, are they insane? No. If you were raised by the headhunters of the Amazon as a baby, never saw anything else, you'd be a headhunter. If you were raised in Nazi Germany as a baby, Heil Hitler, you'd be a Nazi. So people are not good or bad. It depends on where they're coming from. Assuming you were raised as a headhunter, if I went into your hut and I said, doesn't it bother you to have 6 shrunken heads there? He says, yes, my brother has 20. Is he bad? No. He was brought up in that culture. If you were brought up way back in the Middle Ages, in Salem, Massachusetts, way back then, they used to burn women, and very few men, but mostly women, that had ideas of their own. They would be burnt alive because they were told they were satanic or witches. This is Salem, Massachusetts in the United States, a short time ago. Why did they do that? For every witch you found, you inherited their bank account and their property. Did you know that? No, it's not in your history books. So they keep things out of your history books. They do not teach people at universities to think. They teach them to be a cog in the wheel, a doctor, a lawyer, a biologist, a physicist, a chemist, an anthropologist, but they don't teach you how to think. So once they do that, you're under that control and under that influence. Someday, all children will be raised in a mixed environment. So children have no bad attitude. Children will even reach for a rattlesnake. They have no attitude until you start saying, you're Irish, you don't play with that Greek boy. It's when you go to work and poison your kids. So somebody said to me, who will raise the children in the future? People that understand what shapes human values. Parents would have to go to school to learn how to raise children. I'll give you one idea of that, how it works. I never taught my little boy how to read when he was 4 or 5 years old. Way before that, when he was 2 years old, I used to read to him. Then I'd close the book at the most interesting part at night when he was in bed. He said, Daddy, but what happened then? I said, look, if you learn to read, you can find out for yourself. Give them a reason to want to read. Don't teach them to read. Don't teach them that 2 and 2 is 4, because there's 4 what? Doesn't make sense. And when you use this on children, if you tell them to spell cat with a C-A-T, and they spell it with a K-A-T, don't say that's wrong. Just say you're very close. We just changed the K into a C. But if you say that's wrong, now you have to think about that. What does that tell anybody? That's wrong. Doesn't tell you a damn thing. If you say to a kid, that's not what I told you, that doesn't tell them anything. But if you say, if you take the K away and put a C there, it's closer to the way we want you to write. But if the key comes back with a C facing the wrong way, don't say it's wrong. Just say, you're getting much closer. Turn the C around. So we don't even know how to educate people. We condemn people. We give them grades in school. He gets a passing grade. You fail. He says, I'm better than you. And you make jealousy and envy. Whenever you have 2 children, if you pick up the young one and play with it, say young one, say 2, 3 years old, and the old one is 6 or 7, he's standing there with that lower lip out, like that. You're making jealousy and envy. So you always take the young kid, put it on your lap, and the older kid, and never pit them against each other. Never say, why can't you be like your sister? She puts everything away, and you leave everything all around, and I have to pick up after you. Then when your sister falls down the stairs, you got a grin on your face. I'm trying to tell you the world is unsane, not insane. Unsane means you're brought up with false values. They think that all Irishmen are drunkards. And if you wanted to clean out your cellar, get a big dumb Pollock. And they got that something about everybody, nasty. So years ago, I said to myself, Jacque, if you want to design a new world, how are you going to change people? They all have different concepts of God. They have different concepts of conduct. And they're all very different in their values. How are you going to reach them? And I said, I don't know. That's the first thing you have to learn how to say in science. I don't know. That's very hard for people to say, because you give everybody a right to their own opinion. Well, if a girl lives across the way from me and 10 guys come out of her apartment, I can have all kinds of opinions. She could be a language instructor, a ballet instructor. But if you give everybody a right to their own opinion, say, you think we'll ever get to the moon? Nah, not in 1,000 years. Just say, I don't know. I don't know anything about rockets. I know nothing about space travel. I can't answer that question. You give people a right to their own opinion. You think man can fly? Nah. If the Lord wanted man to fly, he'd have been born with wings. Well, if the Lord wanted you to wear clothing, you'd have been born with a suit. So years ago, I wanted to know what people would be like if they were brought up in a primitive environment. So I worked my way on a banana boat to a set of islands called Tuamotu. And when I got there, everybody walked around naked. And I never saw a male stare at a female body. They've been swimming nude ever since they were little. So a nude woman didn't mean anything. They only looked at the eyes of a girl. They never say, hey, fellas, get a load of that chick. That's what you get in the civilized world, which is artificial. You have to think about that now. Think about it. There was no peeping Toms on the island because girls and boys walked around nude. If they had to piss, they went off in the woods and pissed. And nobody ever became a peeping Tom. There were no fetishes, meaning no tit men, leg men, ass men, or long hair men that like different aspects. It's when you hide. If you hide a girl's nose, you said to the guy, did you ever see a girl's nose? No, show him a little bit, have to loosen his collar. If you bring him up to that, so we are made the way we are. We don't have our own minds. When you're very young, your mother pumps. Who loves you more than anybody in the world? I don't know, your mommy and daddy. Okay. What's the greatest country? I don't know, India, Spain, France. They pump all that shit in your head, and then you think you're free. You think you're making your own decisions. You don't. So I did a lecture at Princeton University, and the subject matter scared everybody. It was called Man Cannot Think or Reason. Now that made everybody angry, and they all wanted to come to discredit me, of course. And a guy from the optics department said, I don't agree with you. I think man can think and reason. I said, give me one example. He said, there are many examples. I said, I can't do anything with that. Give me one example. So he said, well, somebody had to invent the camera. He had to think of it. There was no camera around. Well, let me try to describe that to you. If you go into a barn in the daytime, it's very dark. If there's a knothole in the barn, that is where light can come in, you will see cows walking upside down on the wall in your barn. 1,000 years ago in the Holy Land, if a guy lived in a clay hut and he had a little hole in, you'd see people, if the sun was out, walking upside down on the wall. And he charged 2 pieces of silver to see the upside down world. That's where the camera came from. Light coming into a dark area from a little hole. I said, well, the guy got mad at me. He said, what about moving pictures? There's no moving picture out there. Where'd the guy get the idea? The Chinese used to carve a girl out of either wood or laminated paper with hands up like that. This is 1,500 years ago. And then they take that little statue and put a candle in front of it and oiled paper behind her. As the candle flickered, the girl danced. You understand that? It was a silhouette. The candle flickers as it burned, and it looked like the girl was dancing. That was the first motion picture. Then the Chinese took a lot of paper and made up a pad, and they tied it together. And they marked the corner so you know what number and what sequence was in that pad. But if you happen to flip it fast, that number jumped all over the paper. When you make a mark in the corner of a bunch of little pieces of paper bound together and flip it fast, that mark will jump around. A Chinese artist drew a bird's wings here, 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 and there. And he drew it in the corner of the page. And when you flip it fast, it looked like the bird was flying. That was 1,500 years ago. And the Chinese didn't sit down and invent them, those moving pictures. They encountered them by accident. A Frenchman saw that in a Chinese museum, and he machined it out of brass did a beautiful job, and he put all the pictures in a circle, and he turned the crank, and the bird flew very well. But occasionally the wings would stop, and he found out he had to hold his finger there and let the pictures go by, but stop for a short distance, for a short time, so the eye can pick up the image. Once that was developed, the Frenchman copied that, put it in a circle, put more pictures there, and turned the crank, and he had a beautiful shot of the waves of the sea moving like that, and a man walking. Edison bought that from a Frenchman. Edison did not invent the movie camera. Nobody ever invented anything. It's happened so slowly. Like I tried to tell you before, language. They say language was invented to communicate. That's a lie. Somebody banged his elbow once and went, ah. He banged his wing, ooh. He ate something good, and that's where language came from. Sounds people made in relation to different events. The human brain, if you're born with a better brain than anybody else, better brain tissue, more neurotransmitters, you become ignorant faster if you associate with ignorant people. The brain has no mechanism for deciphering that which makes sense and doesn't. You have to have experience. If you still don't understand me, if you smell a rose and you enjoy it, and years later you go to another place, another country, say like Madagascar, and you see a rose with black dots on it, you tend to smell it. But if it burns your eyes and your nose for a week and a half, the next flower you see, you go. So this is how you learn. And nobody, this is really harder to understand, nobody ever makes a mistake in their life. Nobody. Now let me try to answer that. In France, long before the Wright brothers, a guy built 2 sets of wings. They were only 3 feet long, and he jumped off the Eiffel Tower, and he died. And his brother-in-law wrote, make wings larger next time. There's no other way to know. Nobody makes a mistake. The first man that mixed nitric acid and glycerin together, the building disappeared, so did the guy. His brother-in-law wrote, never fool with that stuff. Man never makes a mistake. He doesn't know. How can he know how to build a flying machine? Unless he encounters that it won't get off the ground if the wings are too short, so he makes them larger. And that's the story of all invention. I asked an Indian, who invented the bow and arrow? Well, he said his great-grandfather told him that the Indians used to tie skins. They'd skin an animal, put it out in the sun, and it would shrink, and they didn't like that. So they tied the skin to a frame. But what they tied it with a leather strip. So when you cut a leather strip, put it out in the sun, it shrinks. It goes fatter and shorter. So he tied it to a stick. But the stick wasn't thick enough, and the leather shrunk, and he got the bow. You understand what I'm talking about? Nobody ever sat down and invented the bow and bow and arrow. It was discovered. All ideas. So another guy from the electrical engineering department got up and said, what about Tesla? He invented the wireless. The brain can't invent anything. Here's where Tesla got the wireless from. When you bought wire in the old days, they wrapped it around a cardboard tube. But sometimes the wire was broken, so they connected 2 electrodes from a battery to make sure the wire wasn't broken. When you bought thinner wire, they wrapped around a small coil. If he put that in the package when you went out of the electric store, if you checked the wiring, it induced the current in the one that wasn't connected. And the guy was just as surprised as anybody. And that's where Tesla got it from. Man cannot invent anything. The bird suggests a flying machine. The Wright brothers didn't sit down and invent a flying machine. They made little gliders with feathers, and they didn't work too well. And then they killed the pigeon and put wires in its wings and moved the wings forward and backward till they found the balance point. That was really where they get the information. There's not a single thing that you can think of that wasn't invented serially, little by little, until it becomes computers. And people say, gee, I can't even think of anything like that. That's because you don't understand that nobody invents anything. Somebody invents a little thing, and they add to that, and it grows. The same with language and knowledge. Without experience, there's no knowledge. The schools of the future will never give children grades because that produces bad feelings. They will say, never use words like it's wrong, but they'll show them the approach to make it correct. So what is science? Science is based upon the ability first to say, I don't know. When the government approached scientists and said, we'd like to put a man on the moon, can you do it? They said, we don't know. What do you mean you don't know? They said, well, we don't know what a man can stand. The government says, I still don't know what you mean. We have to put a guy in a centrifuge and whirl him around, and if he conks out at 7 or 10 Gs, 10 times gravity, we know that we can't take off at 50 Gs. Everybody would die. That's where they get their information, whirling a guy around. And if he survives, they know what speed to take off. Now, how do you feed a guy in a spaceship? You give him a glass of water. If you pull the glass away, the water will stay there in space, then become little bubbles and fill the spaceship. So they put water in a tube, and you squeeze it. You can't know that until you get out into space. If you live out in space, say, for 3 or 4 months or 6 months, calcium in your bones begin to disappear. You won't know that until somebody's been out there and you come back and you check them out. So science is the ability to check out things. Religion makes assumptions that somebody up in the clouds made a man and woman. And he had a snake, of course, he made that too, that walked upright. And the snake came over to Adam and Eve and said, don't eat of the fruit of the tree. And they said, which tree is that? And he pointed it out. And of course they ate because they were curious. And then he kicked them out of heaven. Is this God or a jerk? I once asked Einstein whether he believed in God. He said, which one? In the old days, they used to think there's 40 gods, the god of love, the god of agriculture, the god of battle, war. In the Viking books, it says, you can't get into heaven unless you die in battle. That's a hell of a good technique. Think about it. So the world you live in, I'm trying to tell you this, is full of shit. It is baseless. It's stupidity which you put in high places because the guy has gray hair or he looks dignified or he's got a dog on his lap. There are no good dogs and no bad dogs. I used to train dogs to lead the blind. When I was a kid, they used to walk with a stick. So I trained dogs to lead the blind, and a sweet old lady came over and said, what a nice dog. I said, no, I could have trained that dog to tear soldiers to pieces. There's no good or bad dogs. It depends on the way you bring them up. Do you understand that? Same with children. Same with thieves, serial killers. They're all made by different aspects of the environment. There are no prisons in the future, no police, no armies, no navies, if you understand what I'm talking about. So when you leave here, you should be a little different than the way you came in. And if you don't talk to other people about the Venus Project, I can assure you nothing will happen. We'll probably continue to pollute the air, the earth, and have wars. So if you want to change society, go to work on your friends, have meetings, talk about it. That's what the Zeitgeist movement's about. Getting there and talking about people, how we get to be the way we are, how to make the world a better place, and how to bridge the difference between nations. Well, as a kid, I said, Jacque, how are you going to bridge the difference? These people are so different. So I joined the Ku Klux Klan, and I dissolved it in a month and a half. Then I joined the White Citizens Council. They hate foreigners, blacks, Orientals, almost everybody. I dissolved it in 1 month. Then when I got back to New York, I said, what are the most backward people in the New York area? And they said, the Arabs that live on Atlantic Avenue. I said, what makes you think they're backward? Well, they still believe the earth is flat. So I said, I've got to change them. If I want to change the world, I've got to be able to change them. So I got in touch with the Arab in charge of that group. His name was Elbaz. And I called him on the phone and I said, Elbaz, can I come and talk to you? He said, you are Arab? That's the way he spoke. I said, that means just in Arabic. I speak a little bit of different languages. So he said, from where your father he born? I said, Lebanon. He said, very good, come and saw me. Means come and see me. So I came to see him, and he said to me, you believe the word he learned? I said, yes. So he held his hands up like this. He said, he pointed to his head first to show how smart he was. Then he came back and he said, if the world he learned, man fall me down here. All the water he fall me down from the world. Cannot be round, has to be flat. So I said, boy, if I can't change him, how the hell am I going to change the world? So I gave him a balloon which I brought with me, and I told him to hold the balloon, and I rubbed it with fur. And I put cornflakes in his hand and told him to hold his hand far away from the balloon, about that distance. And when I rubbed the balloon, all the cornflakes jumped up to the balloon. And he looked at it, and his jaw hit the paper. He said, world he magnet? I said, yeah. Ah! And he explained that to all the other Arabs. It took an hour and a half to turn them around. I brought a Japanese kid home one day, and my mother said, I don't want that kind around. My mother was brought up that way, of course. I used reason with her. She said, I still don't want that kind around. So I said, boy, if you can't get to your mother, Jacque, you can't change the world. So I said, well, how can I get to my mother? And I tried certain systems, and one worked. I said, I was swimming in the East River, Mother, and there was no way to get ashore. There's a high wall, and Masato, this isn't true, by the way, Masato worked on a boat, and he threw a life raft to me. So I said, if it wasn't for Masato, I'd be dead. She says, oh, my God. She says, I hurt his feelings, didn't I? I said, yes, you did. She said, please ask him to come back. I want to beg and apologize. So I said, Mother, I don't know if he'll come back now, to get her to plead with me. She kept pleading, please, ask him to come back. I said, all right. I called Masato, and I told him the lie I told my mother. I said, the minute you walk in the door, she's going to hug you, God bless you, and all that sort of thing. And she did that. At the dinner table, she was talking to him. So I walked out. When Masato went to the washroom, I came back and said, Mother, what do you think? She said, you know, he's just like you and I. He's a decent human being with a nice family. And I said, yeah, but he's a member of the yellow race. She said, that's got nothing to do with it. He's a nice boy. And then a month later, she puts her arm around Masato and calls him son, because she really got to like him. Then I told her that he never saved my life. She said, you little devil, I would have never opened the door. So sometimes reason and logic doesn't work. I'm trying to tell you the world you live in is very sick. And if you don't go to work on people and teach them that there's no such thing as Italian blood, and Greek blood, and French blood, and Indian blood, there's certain blood types. Sometimes your own kid can't give you a transfusion. So all human beings need clean air, clean water, good food, a relevant education. We all need the same thing. But when you start dividing people, the Arabs are dumb and the Germans are militaristic. They're militaristic if they're brought up in a militaristic environment. So I'm trying to tell you that environment basically shapes behavior. Genetics shapes your nose, the color of your eyes, the shape of your ears. And sometimes when something goes wrong with the genes, you're born with 2 heads or 6 arms. You know, that's genetic. But your values, your attitude about life and the world is learned. That's not inherited. People do not inherit evil. They do not inherit killing ability, to want to be a serial killer. That is done by either brain damage due to a disease or the fact that they've been mistreated as a kid. If a young girl, parents fight all the time, and father beats mother, that girl might grow up and say, boy, I'm never getting married. That's her experience. So people get different types of environments that they're exposed to, and they come out a little different. That's why they're all, well, they're mostly similar, but there are those differences. That comes from an environment. So I'll open this portion to questions. So if you have any questions, raise your hand. Somebody will appear with a microphone.